Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl, aka Janine Luby, and I'm really excited to talk about something not so funny this week, but something that needs to be talked about, and something that I think you're really going to want to hear and listen to going forward. A new podcast that will be out from a friend of mine who is actually also very funny. I usually like to talk a little bit in the beginning of my podcast about some wine fact or whatever, but it is 1:13 on a Wednesday afternoon. Now, does that mean anything? No, not really. Not necessarily, but I am drinking coffee in my, of course, Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl, mug. So that's a
Ooh.
totally cheesy plug. But I want to introduce my guest, Megan Goetz. She is a very funny young woman I had the pleasure of working with in the Poconos at one of my comedy shows, and I hope to have her back again, that we get to work together. But I don't know, because she's getting all kinds of fame now. You were very recently in, was it Philadelphia's Funniest Showcase?
Yeah, I was. I was a finalist for that showcase, which was really fun. So there's a lot going on. I'm recording an album in October here in Philly. That'll be really cool too. So yeah, good things happening.
I'm very excited for you. I think it's great. And I think, again, I know I don't want this to come off this compliment as condescending, but I love your humor. I mean, I've only seen you a couple times, but it's smart, which is, I mean,
thank you.
and I don't mean that to be, but I mean, there's.
Oh no, I think I lost you for a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. And for those of you listening, I apologize. Every day, every week is a new journey with this whole thing. And technology
Absolutely.
gods are really revolting, I think, this week.
Mm-hmm.
But your stuff, I like stuff that it's just not, I don't know. I'm just not into like silly stuff. And I just think that your stuff is smart, and that's why I like it, but I'm not going to pontificate about my interests.
And I think you're really funny too. I think you should come to Philly and we could do shows together. Just let me know. I'll message you after this.
Mutual love fest. Let me tell you, and I don't want to get sidetracked because I want to get to what we want to talk about today, but I see all this stuff going on in the Lehigh Valley and Philly, like all the open mics. And I will tell you, if I wasn't such a lazy ass wimp, I would go to these things, because it's like about two hours ish, and it could be a little more with traffic. And years ago, when I started in comedy, started in comedy like I'm in it. I mean, I'm not like serious, but like when I was in my early 30s and I worked my full-time day job, I was driving to it was on Route 1. I think it was like a Best Western, and they had a Monday night open mic, because that was when I just started doing them, because there wasn't much locally. And I would go to work all day and then drive the 2 hours to Philly. And like, I don't even, like, I can't imagine doing that now. Cause like I said, I'm a wimp, and I'm like, I stay home. But to your point, I would love to come. And maybe one of these days when I have a lot of caffeine or something, I can get behind the wheel.
As someone that doesn't go to the gym, I feel it's a lot like going to the gym, where like the first 2 times you do it, you're like, this feels terrible. But then after those first 2 times, you're like, oh, this is just my routine now. Like, if you stop, and I think getting back into it after COVID has been really hard, because it's weirdly nice to have a life and be home and like actually cook a dinner once and not just eat whatever you can find laying around, So yeah, I totally understand that, like, having to get back out there. But I feel like once you do it, you're going to feel awesome. You're going to be like, this is the best. I can't believe I ever stopped. Or I don't know if you're still doing it, just like not as frequently, but
that is and I'll admit, like, I haven't done like regular open mics in a long time, just because, and believe me, it's not that I don't think I need the work. Absolutely I do. But like, it is totally like laziness. And like, we don't have as many opportunities here. Like, we might have one or two like open mics that start, and I hate to say this, but it usually just fizzles out. Like, that's what just happens. We don't have the community to support it. But thankfully in Philadelphia, you guys seem to be thriving. Like, there's a lot going on, which is great. Helium's in Philly too, right?
Helium, and now there's also a Punchline comedy club. So
okay, great. And I apologize because I don't think people in Philadelphia like it at Philly, right? Is that not a thing to say?
I'm from the Poconos, so your guess is as good as mine.
I feel like people said, oh no, we don't like when you say Philly.
I call it Philly to all of them. Okay. That's probably why they're so mad at me all the
They can be a fickle bunch, Philadelphia, I
Yes,
think.
absolutely.
Okay, but so anyway, so this is Megan, and she's awesome. She's funny. And before we talk about your new podcast, which you're going to be launching September 13th, which is called Their Stories, tell
Mhm.
me about the other podcast, because you also have something about paranormal stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a podcast called Real Chills, and we take guests and have them tell their real, true life paranormal stories. And then after, we'll tell a story that's similar to that and play a game. And it's really, really fun. The stories we have are insane. Like, I thought we do have a lot of ghost stories, but we also have like a werewolf story that's like they truly believe they saw some sort of werewolf. We also have a Bigfoot story, which was really fun. So it like it's everything. It's really cool.
That sounds really neat. Let me ask you, I've been watching American Horror Stories, and I got introduced to this idea of like, I don't know if this is out there, if this just came from the minds of the writers, but the feral nation, feral people in like the
Oh,
woods. Is that something that you guys have ever
we
heard about
haven't
or talked
talked
about?
about that. I saw that going super like viral on TikTok. Everyone being like, "There's feral people," and I think it was national parks.
Yes.
And I was like, that is too. That's almost too real. I feel like that is. We're not very true crimey. We're more like supernatural. So we try to stay away from stuff where we're like, oh no, now I'm gonna lock. Like I've caught myself after watching true crime stuff, locking my boyfriend out of our bedroom on accident, like because I'm just so scared. So I try to stick to fun, scary, like ghosts and time slips, things like that.
Okay. All right, cool.
Uh-huh.
Well, you may like it's going to be like September 29th. I have a podcast coming out with an episode with a good friend of mine who does these things in the cemetery. They have actors, and they basically do the stories of people. Like, we're here in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and the cemeteries in Dunmore, right close by. She researches people who are buried there, and she kind of like tells the story of
That's
different people.
so cool. Yeah. If she wants to be on the podcast, if you want to be, if you have any paranormal stories, it's all about getting like those true life situations. So that's right up our alley. I have a co-host, me and Alyssa. I love that. That's so cool.
I will reach out to Julie is her name, and she's a historian. She loves history, and she's also hilarious. Like, the time I saw her tour, she was playing some woman who was, let's say, she was loose in the lips and the hips. Like, she was just, back in like 1910, just having a great time. But like, all the actors are really entertaining, and they do the stories in the cemetery, so it's pretty neat. It's pretty cool.
I love that. My birthday was in December, so COVID was still a huge thing. And this was like the perfect birthday surprise. My boyfriend surprised me by getting us a ghost tour, like an outdoor walking tour, and inviting my friends, and they were allowed to come because it was just 6 of us outside, masked. And it was so much fun walking around and learning the history of Philly and all the like spooky stuff that still happens here.
That is really neat. We have one in Scranton, and I mean, I am all about pro Scranton. I've lived here my whole life. I've never gone on it, and I will tell you, it sells out like all the time. So I couldn't get to
Yeah.
see it last time, but it's a neat idea because we have like the Banshee downtown. Well, now it's called AV Restaurant, but supposedly like Food Network last year, the year before, voted it like the most haunted restaurant. And when it was the Banshee, like people
Wow.
talked about seeing things in the mirror and like seeing chairs move or just weird stuff like that. Because I think it was briefly 19, maybe 18, a morgue, because there were
Okay.
hospitals nearby. So like during that pandemic or whatever, it was used as a morgue or something. So I don't
Sure.
know. But that sounds something like that's right up your alley anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm convinced. I think the Poconos are maybe one of the most haunted places like in the country. Like even where I'm from, there's multiple like haunted places. The first episode we did for Real Chills, I covered a candle shop that's like 40 minutes from where I lived in East Stroudsburg that is haunted by monkeys. So way back, yeah, like way back in the 1800s, they were trying to find a cure for, I think it was yellow fever. I'm not positive about that, but they were testing on monkeys, and they think the monkeys are still at this place. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh. No, I have
Uh-huh.
never heard of monkeys haunting a place. Like,
Yeah,
I didn't know
it's yeah.
animals could do that.
It's really fun. It's kind of cheesy. I've been there way too many times, embarrassing to admit, but they have like a little tour. You can go down in the basement and they tell you the history, and it has a lot of like really old animatronics, which kind of takes away from the spookiness, but it's super fun
Oh,
still.
that sounds cool. That sounds
Yeah.
really cool. Well, let's transition into your new podcast. So, we were talking kind of casually. I don't know. All of a sudden, I'm like, we were talking, we were talking before about the popularity of true crime
Yes. Yeah.
podcasts, but also I feel like it's everywhere too, like on Netflix and everything. And I mean,
Mhm.
while that's somewhat relatively new in the past few years, let's face it, like I always laugh that like Lifetime movies are always
Yeah.
about women being like chased, you know, an abusive husband, an abusive neighbor. Like it's been out there.
Right.
But true crime like podcasts and shows are just like crazy popular.
Oh yeah.
And
Mhm.
I mean, what do you I mean, I guess people like a scare, but in these stories, a lot of them are like real, which
Mhm.
is kind of like what do you like I mean, and we talked about this earlier. In some ways, like you said, you feel a little guilty. I wonder why I watch them because I live alone and
Oh
I get
no.
scared. So I mean, I
Mhm.
watched a show on Netflix that was based on real stuff. It was actors were in it though. It wasn't a documentary. It was very good. Toni Collette was in it and I forget who else, but it was about a rapist. And I binged it one weekend, and that's when I started putting like a baseball bat in my bed because
Yes.
I
Yeah.
was fearing rapists like breaking in because he was breaking into homes.
Right.
Why do you think people, especially women, because there's a high percentage of women who listen to these
Mhm.
podcasts and watch Netflix, why are we like so interested, or why do you think the people you talk to and you like, what's the fascination? Do you think?
I think for me, the fascination has always been like, if I hear this stuff, I'll know more of their tricks. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm distrustful already in like in situations, but sometimes you hear these stories and you're like, that's tricky. Like that, like when they talk about Ted Bundy, I go crazy because he didn't like charm people back to his house. He like faked injuries and stuff like that. And then like, so it's like learning to be defensive, I guess, and it's really morbid to say that, but I think it's just like you're like, for me, the positive was like, what can I learn from this so this doesn't happen to me or my friends? Like, how do I keep us safe? But it's also just there's a lot of like it's really intense to hear, like I don't know, it's learning about humanity and like seeing like, oh man, like there's really evil people out there, you know.
Yeah, I know what I just did before. I was just looking at like some of the information out there about our fascination, and NPR did a segment on it, and I just did like I skimmed it. But two things. One of the things that you said, they said women do listen for that reason, like they're hoping to
Mm-hmm.
learn something. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what should I be aware of? What could I do better? And the other thing they said is sometimes women listen out of empathy for the
Yeah.
victims.
Right.
And the other, I guess, could just be like fascination or, you know, I hate to say it, but it is. It's that like the story, for some reason, we listen to those type of stories. I don't know.
Yeah. And the thing that I there's a lot I really like Dateline. I think they do a really good unbiased job. But then there's other podcasts that I have to stop listening to because I feel like at first true crime was very much like victim oriented, but like the longer this goes on, it almost feels like now I'm learning like the murderer was born this day and this was his childhood and this was his favorite food and honestly I'm like, I don't care. Like I don't, I get the obsession, but at the same time I hope nothing good happens for that like I don't want to know their life. I don't want them to be known. I just like I'm listening to this story, I guess, like you said, for empathy and also like how do I avoid these situations. So I don't like that, like how it's become more of like let's focus on the person committing all these crimes, it's
It
yucky.
almost feels sometimes like they're glorifying or making like the murderers to be almost like rock stars,
Yeah.
in a way. I watched the John Gacy murders like documentary, and
Mhm.
his clown paintings go for like tons of money. And I think, again, I don't know if the information was accurate. I think it said that the family was giving the money to like a charity. I think I could be wrong,
Okay.
and you would hope so because I would hate to think someone was profiting off of what he did, you know,
Yeah.
and it's kind of sick. And so to your point, like you said, it does worry me too because I watch them and then I'm thinking, are we going too far with these?
Yes.
Like it's
Yeah.
about the murderer, you
Right.
know, like and it shouldn't be like to give them fame, you know.
Yeah, and I've heard a few cases where podcasts who do a lot of research have actually leaked information about the murder that the families didn't know about. So that's like such an awful way to hear about a loved one, so I think there's a good space for true crime, and like the podcast that we're going to talk about that I'm doing, like I mentioned to you, I don't think it's to like, I don't want it to be on opposing sides. I think it's just there's a spot for it. And maybe like, okay, maybe you'll listen to my podcast and then you'll go look up what happened to these people, because we don't talk about that part. But at least now you know who this person is. Like, you can't go into it cold anymore. Like, after this. So should I explain what it is? I feel like
yeah. No, I was gonna say, honestly, that's the perfect segue. So
yeah.
September 13th, you will launch Their Stories, because you are going to tell what is really kind of missing out in the space right now. You are not focusing on the murderer. You are focusing on the families, the people who were their stories, their lives. So go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. So basically this podcast, I sat down with murdered people's friends and families, and we talked about their life. We told like their favorite stories, their hobbies, their favorite music, silly things that happened, what they were like as kids. So when you're hearing this podcast, you're getting to know their life. You're not defining their life by this one awful moment that really, I think most of the people on the podcast didn't happen, but wish they could kind of forget, So it's really interesting to get to sit and actually give the narrative back to the families and let, their stories be told the way that the people who love them most want it to be. Also, I was talking to one of the people and they were like, anytime you search their loved one's name, the murderer's name is attached to it. And that is just so, I don't know, it's just like adding insult to injury. So like, at least in this space, it has nothing to do with the murder. It's just, look at this person. They were a really good person and they had so many cool qualities. So it's been really special. And the families also talk about what they want to advocate for. So what organizations mean the most to them. So it's been really fun and cool. Yeah.
So let me ask you, so is this, I mean, I know you have the paranormal going. Is this something that you see like continuing, or do you have like a finite, like I'm starting it here and we're going to have X amount of episodes because this is what I've done? What are your like plans for it?
Yeah, so I plan for seasons. I don't think this is the type of thing where I could maintain it. It actually is very challenging to get guests because they're distrustful of podcasts in general. Mm-hmm. So I'm so thankful for the people who trust it. I have 7 episodes. They're all very different. Some talk about gun violence, domestic violence, just like one was a serial killer. So every episode is very, very different, and you kind of learn something new from each of them. And after the 7 episodes, if people really like it, or like if families want this for their loved ones after they hear it, then I'll do a second season. But I just want to release a season and then see how it goes.
Oh, that's good. And I mean, like you said, see what the response is, I guess.
Yeah.
And then because you're giving this platform that's really not, like you said, it's not really out there. And, mm-hmm. if families hear the other people's stories, maybe they'll want to, because they'll want their son or daughter or whoever to, to be remembered a certain way. And it's like you brought up, it's kind of sad that when, if they Google the name of the person, that the killer's name comes up, and that is tragic, because it's just giving them more. It's their story, Exactly.
Like these people are more than just like the last thing that happened to them. That's all I want to focus on with the podcast. So
yeah. Have you do you want to give like, so you kind of did hint at, like, that you said they're very different, right? So some is gun violence, some of the families are using their voices, their tragedy, and trying to advocate maybe for change and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the families I've talked to are some of the most impressive people I think I've ever met to overcome such a tragedy. And then also just with like such force, be like a good presence in the world, So yeah, we talk about the person I talked to most recently, her daughter was killed in the Aurora theater shooting. And they have a program. I'll have to give you the link to it because I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was really interesting to me because it focuses on helping other survivors of this type of any type of loss deal with their trauma. And the whole episode was just talking about how important it is to kind of face things when you're in a tragedy instead of bearing it down. And it was just eye-opening to me, and the work they're doing for other people to try to help them get back to a normal life is like so impressive.
Wow, that's so how did you end up? Did you actually just put something out on social media, or did you have like somewhat of a connection of somebody who knew somebody kind of thing? Because I would think that would be, like you said, they're mistrustful. So how do you reach out to get to find people like this who are willing to share their story?
It was a lot of work. It was
Mm.
so the first person I had one episode, a fellow comics mom's best friend was murdered, and they had that trust. So once I had the one episode, I was like, all right, now I have to do this. So basically, I have listened to a lot of these podcasts, felt guilty about it because it was starting to glorify. But then when I would listen to the podcast, they'd say, you can like donate here. So I'd go to that page, I'd email the foundation. So like I didn't want to do anything creepy, like go to their Facebook and message them. But if I could find like a foundation page or something like that, I would tell them the whole gist. And I'd probably say 7 out of the 10 times they didn't get back to me, but a few people did. And I just kind of went with it, whoever. So a lot of these people just trust me, which every recording blew my mind that they did, but I'm happy they did. And I think they're really going to like what they hear.
Would you say is that, I mean, obviously the tone is, I don't want to say serious, but serious because but maybe there's probably some moments that might have been lighthearted, right? If they're sharing the personality of their loved ones, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So the tone starts somber because we know how this life like that this life did end, but the tone of the episode is very fun. It can be like very silly. The stories are adorable. Like it's not meant to make you feel bad or like, I don't think anyone's gonna you might be sad that they were killed, but you're gonna be like happy to hear these stories. I think they're really special and sweet.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because I mean, I'm thinking to myself in my mind, well, it's not just sadness, right? I mean,
No, yeah,
obviously the families don't want it to be just sadness. I mean,
right.
especially if they're telling, what the personality was like, or what some
Mm-hmm.
of the things they like to do, like something that they, or, maybe something they hope to do and didn't get to do. So there's probably all kinds of a variety in how the emotion in it. I would imagine.
Yeah, there was a lot of things, and it's gonna be interesting when other people hear it because I think you're gonna learn stuff about yourself. So the first thing I learned was like relating my relationships to their relationships that they had with the person they lost, and like you connect on that like human level about that, and then you just like I after that last one about who lost her daughter, I immediately called my mom and was like, I love you. I miss you. It's really sweet. You start to realize like, oh, I have these really strong relationships that I should, appreciate while I'm here. Like they totally did that too. You could tell they loved each other. So, but that was one thing. The other thing I learned is for some of these people, the murder occurred 20, 30 years ago, and it's still really painful. Like sometimes when you listen to these podcasts, you're like, oh, this happened in the 70s. Like I'm sure anyone involved is either like passed on or doesn't, like it's old news, but like even after 30 years, it's something that doesn't go away for them. Like you figure out tools to help, but it's always there. So it makes me realize like maybe these podcasts should be like a little more delicate when it comes to at least like telling the victim story.
Yeah, and I mean, and to your point, I think I don't have children, but you always often hear, parents saying if they have lost a child that they never get over that. Like that's not something that they forget. Like they're always,
Right.
and I'm friends with someone who's lost two children I think they were in their early 20s, and she posts about it like a lot because
Mm-hmm.
it's just a heartache that isn't healing, it doesn't go away. You just kind of, I guess, learn to live with it, or,
Right.
people do different things, I guess, to cope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You learn that like I in that last episode she mentioned like you learn tools that will help you overcome those days that are hard. Some days are better than others for them, but yeah, I just think this is a really cool way to memorialize these people. And I'm also making a website. So if you listen to the podcast and you know one of the people or you were touched by their stories, you can go to the episode page and you can leave like a nice comment. So you could be like, I remember, here's a story I have with this person, or this reminded me of my relationship with my mom. Like, thank you for opening up. It was really special to me. So I'm hoping that even though the episode's over, the stories continue like to compile and grow.
That's a beautiful idea, really. And I mean, and
Yeah.
that's going to only honor them even more, which is
Right.
really nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
It also struck me that as you were saying, like they're saying what they do to cope, not that this is meant to be, your podcast like therapy, but at the same time, I'll bet if people who listen have lost a loved one in a violent way or something, they might find some strength or some hope or some coping ideas that maybe they hadn't thought of that could actually help them a great deal.
Absolutely. And it might just even be inspiring to them to see how far these families have come, because it definitely, I'm telling, they're all so impressive to me. Yeah.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that you'd want to, and like you said, you're not bashing true crime. You're just
No,
saying
absolutely not.
here is
Yeah.
this other option that really isn't out there as much. And
Yeah.
hopefully people will listen and just get a new side of it and remember the person who was taken, the life that was taken, and celebrate their life, right?
Yeah. And then when you're listening to true crime, because I'm not saying don't ever listen to it again, you have kind of more of an understanding of like the intricacies or like how delicate people should actually be, because you actually get to hear how it's affecting families. So it's
It's
really
a
cool.
nice reminder of empathy, right? Let's
Yeah.
share that empathy that's often, I hate to say, but often lacking, right?
Right.
In a lot of storytelling. I mean, and again, this isn't swiping at anybody in particular, but like a lot of storytelling is more slick, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
more, let's get the emotions kind of thing. And sometimes that empathy or the softer stuff is kind of missing if it's not as popular, right? Or
Right.
whatever. So,
Yeah.
so well, that's great. I'm really excited for you. Is there anything else that you would want us to know or, so September 13th,
Mm-hmm.
it's called Their Stories, and
Mm-hmm.
it's available, I imagine, on pretty much everywhere, like Apple
Yes.
Podcasts,
Yeah.
Google Podcasts, all over. Okay, Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that people can check out in the meantime, or is there going
Yeah.
to be something beforehand that you want to share?
I have dropped like a teaser episode on Spotify. So if you go to Their Stories on Spotify, you can subscribe. That way, as soon as the podcast is the first one's released, you'll already know about it. So definitely go there and check that out. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'll definitely be posting updates there. I am a comedian, so it's not going to just be that. So don't be surprised if there's also just random jokes about Dunkin' Donuts or whatever. But yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Meg Goetz Money. Goetz is spelled Goetz. It's weird doing this podcast because I really do feel like two opposing forces are just like compete, like my comedy side and then like my serious empathetic side. But yeah, so follow me there if you like comedy and you also want updates for Their Stories.
That's well, and before we close, I think that's interesting because I was thinking of that as we were talking. Like, how do you? Well, I mean, you're human, so I mean, we all have more than
Yeah.
we're not just superficial
Right.
or one sided, but also like that you're doing things and putting things out there that are very different, right? So
Right.
comedy is one thing, but then sharing these stories and then even the supernatural stuff is that, well, you said that's kind of more lighthearted, the paranormal
Right.
or whatever,
Definitely. Yeah.
but this is something very different from
Yeah.
comedy. So it's like, I don't know. And now I feel like it's a stupid question because, like I said, it's not like, well, you're only funny. That's all you got, kid.
No.
But like balancing, I guess you're using different strengths or different
Platforms.
interests
Yeah.
or play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a big part of comedy is empathy. Like it's one of the best feelings in the world as a comedian is connecting with your audience. And there's many ways to do that. So I'm connecting with them in some avenues with laughter, which feels great, but also like with sharing these emotions also. I did worry about that, but at first because I was like, ooh, if they like go through like my videos and stuff, they're not very like like serious professional. But I was just so moved. Like I listened to these podcasts and I caught myself like just getting emotional. So I was like, I have to do it no matter what. Like it's gonna be different, and I do the Real Chills podcast and it's fun and it's silly and I'm like so excited to record before and during it. And this podcast, even though they were great and at the end I'm ecstatic that I did it, leading up to it that day and right before we start, I am so nervous. It's way different than the comedy stuff. I'm like I have to do good. I want to do a good job for them. And it's very different, but it's like very fulfilling. So it's cool.
Well, and I think that's great because it shows how much you care about their stories and really want to
Hmm.
get it right, so to speak, and do them justice, which is, and I mean, it's funny. Earlier today, I recorded a podcast that will air in September. A woman who's a yogi instructor, she's yoga instructor, she does running, and we talked a lot about that positive stuff. And it's like, the hard stuff helps us to grow. So it's
Yeah.
like, you're nervous before that podcast, and but that's a good feeling. Like a lot of times we
Mhm.
don't want that feeling, but I know, and when a lot of times I'm lazy and I'll skip something, but the nights that I do choose to go perform, like let's say at an open mic, or go have a fun improv night and do it, I'm always glad. Or
Yeah.
even with running, I get lazy and I don't like. I'm always happy. Like Saturday, I did a race, and the week before I skipped a race, and which I don't usually do, and I felt, of course, shame, guilt. I get to kick myself
Right.
around, but we always feel usually much better after we've done something that's difficult and stretches us, I would think.
100%. Yeah. After every episode, I was like, that was really great. And I'm so excited for everyone else to hear it.
Good,
Mhm.
good. Well, so you've got the Real Chills podcast. Check out Meg on that. And then when are you recording your stand up? That's in October, your comedy?
October 16th at the Grape Room in Manayunk in Philadelphia. So if you're in the Philadelphia area, it's going to be very fun. And yeah, it just should be a really good time.
Very cool. And be sure to check out, you said you have you can subscribe now to their stories, and you have a little like teaser out there, right?
Yep. Hmm.
Okay, very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure having you on. I can't wait to hear this because now I'm like, all like, oh, I can't wait to hear these stories. It's like
Yeah.
very cool. So thank you so much. And thank you for listening, everyone. This has been Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl Janine. I hope that you will uncork and enjoy something new and exciting and flavorful.